Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I'm gonna finish up this application using MERN where I can basically now be able to update and delete stuff in our database, right? And we'll also obviously update and delete stuff in our screen, so it'll be really nice because we'll be able to have a visual representation of what we're doing. So basically you can see we already have the buttons. We made those in the previous video, and basically what I'm thinking is we'll use a prompt, which is a JavaScript function, to be able to get the values that we want to update. And this is the basic idea of a prompt. You create a variable called whatever you want. I called it update, but I'll change it later. And you set it equal to prompt and a piece of text. It's going to prompt an alert in our screen with an input where we can enter stuff, and then we can set a variable equal to the response of that input. And you'll see it a lot clearer when I basically implemented, but you can see right here what we need to do is we're going to first of all go to our backend and create our route so that we can update stuff in our database, right? You can see our database is over here, and these are all the values. Literally the only thing we want to update is, let me think, maybe the name. Yeah, actually no, let's update the date, the age. So the only value we can update is age, meaning that for some reason if we wrote the age wrong, we want to be able to update it, right? So how do we actually do it? So we can come here into our index.js, and we can start basically by creating a simple route in Express. And to create this route, I'll basically come here and say app.get, and not .get, .put. So .put is usually used to update stuff, so that's why we're going to use this this type of request. So inside of our route, we're gonna name it update, and then we're gonna pass the rec and the res, just like we did before. And obviously, since we're working with Mongoose, we also need to make this asynchronous. So I'm gonna come right here, make this asynchronous, and inside of it, we're gonna have somewhere an await, right? So what do we want? Well, we're going to be getting the data from our frontend, just like we did over here. And I taught you guys that to get data from a frontend, you can just say rect.body, the name of the variable we're going to be passing in the frontend. So let's imagine, what do we actually want to pass here? Well, first of all, we want to pass the new age we want to change, so the new value for the age. And also, we want to pass the ID for the basically the user, right, the friend in our database, because each element has an ID, and that's how we're going to identify which block we want to update. So that's great. So we need two things. We haven't passed them in the front end, but we're going to do it after we finish up with this. So let's create a variable called new age equals to rect.body.newAge. Again, we haven't created those in the front end, but we're going to create it after we do this. Const ID equals to rec.body.id. And then right here, we can pass a try catch. So first of all, try, and then we can catch. And why are we passing a try catch? Just to catch if there's any errors. This is optional actually. I'm just doing this so we are aware if any errors appear. But basically we're going to try to execute this piece of code inside of here. And what is the piece of code we want to execute? Well, we want to await the friend model dot find by ID. So basically we're finding in our model, in our collection, an element with the ID that exists, that basically exists with the ID that we're going to pass through this variable, right? We're going to receive that ID in the front end, and we're going to pass it over here. And then after we get that user, we can just pass an error as well. I'm going to call this error, and because we already have error over here, it's two errors, because first we need to make a request to find the user with this ID, and then we want to update it in our piece of code. So we're going to make two requests. That's why we might have two errors. So error, and then we also want to get the friend we want to update, so friend to update. And you'll see that it is as easy as basically just changing the value. So basically here we were able to get the friend in our database, so the element in our database with the ID equal to the ID we're passing. And this variable right here just represents that object, so it represents that element. And if you want to change anything inside of it, we can just say friend to update dot age equals to new age. So we're just changing the age. And after we do this, we can basically just say friend to update dot save, so we're saving our changes. And then let's just res.send. Actually, our res.send down here. So after we finish our requests, let's just res.send updated. So basically, this is what we're doing. Obviously, this shouldn't matter because we're just working on a simple application. So I'm not working with any crazy like status, sending JSON objects containing messages and whatever. That's for more advanced stuff. But basically here, the idea is we're finding an element in the database with the ID we want to change, and then directly changing that element and saving it, which will basically update it in our database. So now that we have the route done, let's make this change in our frontend. So we're going to come here to the app.js and let's do something. We have an update button, right? We want to be able to click on it and it will like basically call a function, right? So what do? Well, we're going to come here and pass this an onClick event. And inside of it, we're going to pass a function. What is this function? Well, the function will first of all have to take an argument. And what do I mean by have to take an argument? We need to keep track of the ID of the element, right? But how do we keep track of an ID since we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different elements with each one of them having a different ID? So how do I know which ID I want when I click on this button? Well, remember that we are mapping through every element over here. And in order to access the name and the age for each element, I can just say vol.name, vol.age. So why not just give an onClick event, which is calling a function in each update button, but we're passing a different variable for the ID in each update button. So what do I mean by that? Let's create a function up here called const update friend, right? It's going to be equal to a simple function, but this time it won't be empty. We have to get an ID. So this is how we're going to get the ID for each user. And now we can come here and basically just obviously since we're passing an ID, we've got to do it like this. We can come here and say update friend and pass the vol.id. And that's perfect because now we have access to every ID in the database. So now let's implement this function, and it's going to be very simple. First, we need to get the new age we want to get. And as I mentioned before, we're going to basically get this by saying new age equals to prompt, and let's put a question, enter new age. Okay. And now if I click on the button, for now, I can just click on the button and it will open up an alert saying enter new age. I can put a variable here, and that variable, whatever I put inside of there, it's going to be stored in this variable new age right here. So what we want to do with this new age, we want to make an Axios request. An Axios.put, it's going to be to this URL right here. But the difference is it's not going to be add friend, as the route is going to be update, because that's how we called it, right? And then, just like the post request we did up here, we can pass an object, which is going to be the buddy object we're going to be accessing in the backend. And if you remember, the buddy, we added two stuff into the buddy, right? We added the new age and an ID. So we got to pass these two things, right? New age is going to be equal to the new age we're getting from the prompt, and ID is going to be equal to the ID we have up here. So that's perfect. And for now, we don't even need a dot then. Let's just leave it like this, but we're obviously going to be working with a dot then. So how do we actually check to see if everything is working? Well, let's check it. Let's run our server again, and you can see our database here is okay. I'm going to change John's age to 23 because 98 is too much. So I'm going to click on here and pass 23, click OK, and if we refresh our page, this should change to 23. I guess there was an error. Yeah, but that's why we're console logging our errors. So let's see what happened. Emitted error in event function. Well, let's take a look. Okay, cannot set property age of null. What does it mean by cannot set property age of null? Let's take a look. Did I call it age? Yes. So of null. Okay, so we're not actually getting this friend to update. why aren't we getting this friend to update? Well, I'm gonna try to think of this and I'll come back to you guys in a second. Okay guys, I'm back. You can see clearly John has changed, and there's two changes I had to make. One of them is super dumb. So for some reason I wrote ID wrong. You can see that clearly that the ID column includes a slash and underscore right before it. So we were saying vol.id instead of vol._id. So when we put that, now we were basically receiving the correct user in the backend. But the thing is, there was another change. New age is being sent as a string, but in our schema we defined it as a number because age is a number, so I had to write number right before it to convert the new age to a number. So that's the basic idea of what I did. I just fixed the ID and turned new age into a number. So you can see that now. If I click here on Jessica and change her age to 37 and I refresh this, it's going obviously to change it to 37. Now we want to basically be able to show the changes automatically. So how do we actually do that? So in order to do that, we're going to come here to our function, as you can see right here, the update function. And instead of just finishing our put request immediately, we're going to call it .then, so that we do something after the request is done, right? If the request is successful, we want to update the list in our frontend automatically, because the request updates on the backend, but it doesn't on the frontend. That's why to see the changes, we need to refresh our page. But to fix that, we're basically going to come here and say set list of friends, and we're gonna set the list of friends equal to list of friends dot map. So what basically I'm going to do is I'm going to map through every element in the list of friends, and if we reach an element which has the ID equal to the ID we want to change, then we're going to turn that element into a new element. However, we're going to change the age, and for every other element in the list which isn't the element we want to update, we're just going to keep them as they are right now. So this is the basic idea. If you're not very familiar with .map, it's a really important function in JavaScript. It's going to help you a lot. We've already used it in this project, but this kind of idea right here is really important in React when you are using states. So basically this is how we're going to do it. So the .map, we're going to grab a value, which is going to be the value for each element. So when we say value, it's an element, and it's going to map through every element. And then for each element in the list, we want to return basically two cases. First, we got to ask if and we're also going to use basically the ternary operator, so the question mark and the comma and the colon. Those will basically allow us to ask. The question mark is if, and the colon is else. If you've never worked with them, I have a video about them. So basically what we want to do is, first of all, we want to return if the value ._id is equal to the ID. So we're basically asking if the element right now in that we're mapping has an ID which is equal to the ID we're trying to update, then we want to return a new object, but this time this object will contain, first of all, an ID which is equal to the same ID as before, so we can just say ID, and it's going to contain a name which is going to be the same name as before, so we can say vol.name because it's the same name, we're not changing. However, the age, instead of being vol.age, we're going to change it to the new age. So this is how we're going to change it. We're turning every element in the list which has the same ID as the one we want to update, which it turns out to be just one because there's only each element has a different ID, so this is why this works. And then if it doesn't have the same ID, we just want to return the same element, so we can just say vol because we don't want to change anything on it. So now if we come here, refresh our page, we try to update, for example, let's say Paulo, he should be older, let's make him 69, and I click OK. It's gonna say 69. If we refresh the page, it's still 69 because it also updated on the database. Now let's work on deleting stuff, right? Because that's probably as important. So how do we actually delete stuff, right? So I'm gonna come here to our backend, to our index.js, and let's create our route that will allow us to basically make those deletions. So let's come here, let's create a app.delete because it has a delete is a type of request that we can make, and the difference is that with a delete request we can't actually pass an object. We can't pass a body object. And we need to know the ID for the element we want to delete, because we can't just delete every element. We want to delete one specifically. So we use the ID to delete it, right? So how do we actually get this ID if we can't pass it through an object? Well, we pass it through the parameters. So how do we do that? Basically, instead of just passing here slash, for example, I'm going to call it slash delete, but you can call it whatever you want. Instead of just passing a slash delete, you also have to pass another slash, a colon, and then in a name of a variable we want to pass in the URL. For example, we want to pass the ID, I'm going to call it ID. Then we're going to make the same standard asynchronous function, which has a rack, a res, and inside of it, we can now access this ID, which is going to be passed in the parameters of the URL by saying const ID equals to rack.params.id. And now this ID is the same as if we try to make a request with this route right here and pass the ID at the end right here. So now that we have the ID, we can use a very, very important function in Mongoose, which is very simple to understand. It literally is, it's super simple. Literally, you just grab the friend model. So friend model, and there's a function called find by ID and remove. So there's one called find by ID and delete, and there's one called find by ID and remove. You can use both of them in separate cases. Most of the time they both work. I use the remove one. It's very simple. You can just pass here the ID, and at the end you can say dot execute. So dot execute. What happened? Okay. Let me try again. Dot execute. Why is it saying await? Okay, that should be fine. So now that we are executing our function, we're gonna res.send item deleted, and we can basically test to see if everything is working right. Let's stop our server from running, and let's run it again, node-index.js. And now let's make it so that the functionality in the front end allow us to delete. So we want to click on the button and we want to delete that element, right? So let's come here, just like we did with the update. Let's come to the button to remove. We're going to pass an on-click event. I'm going to copy this because we're going to do very similar to the update one, because we also want to pass the ID to this function, but let's basically call it delete friend instead of update friend. And let's create this function up here. So let's create it. Let's call it const delete friend is equal to, and it's going to grab an ID, and it's going to be equal to a function, which inside of here we can grab. Actually, we don't want to grab anything. We can just say Axios.delete. And the good thing is that now we can pass a URL inside of here, right? Just like we did before, we can pass a URL. However, we're not going to use this quotes right here. We're going to use the back quotes. I always forget the name, this type of quotes. The reason for that is because with this type of quotes, we can directly insert JavaScript variables inside the URL. And that's exactly what we want, because if I come here and I copy this and I paste it over here and I say /delete and I put another slash, I can now pass the ID inside of here, so that we grab this ID in the backend. So we can come here and pass a variable by putting a $sign or a money sign and curly braces. And now I'm going to pass the ID inside of here. And just like before, we're going to grab, we can pass a function, right? So I'm not actually going to do it for this one. I'm going to just save this and we're going to test to see if it works. So the function should be working, everything should be working. What I want to delete is basically I'm going to delete Jessica because I don't like that her name is incomplete. I forgot to write the correct name. So I'm going to click on this button. Let's refresh the page. And now Jessica disappeared. So it means it's working. Jessica, obviously, you can see it's still here because we haven't refreshed. If we refresh our database, Jessica won't be over here. But how do we actually delete the user by ourselves, right? We want to delete the user every time we click on it. We don't want to refresh the page. So what we can do is we gotta grab a .then, just like we did with the update one, And after the request is done, we can basically come here and say set list of friends, and instead of using a map function, we're going to use another very similar function called filter. What filter does is you can filter through every element and you determine which ones should stay and which shouldn't. So the only ones we want to stay are the ones which don't have an ID equal to the ID that we currently passed over here. So what does that mean? Well, I can come here and say list of friends dot filter, and it's obviously going to grab a value just like the map, and it's going to grab a function, and basically the function will return a boolean, right? This boolean is a boolean determining if we want to keep the value or not. Well, what does that mean? If I come here and say I want to return and I want to keep a value only if the val.id is not equal to the ID we're grabbing in the function. So it's going to delete it's going to keep only the elements in the list which don't satisfy this condition, which means it's going to keep everything but the other one, and we're going to set the list equal to this temporary list we're creating with these values. So now let's come here, refresh the page, whatever. If I want to delete, for example, John, the first element we created in our database, our first friend, you can click on here and John disappeared. You can see clearly if I refresh the page, John also disappeared forever. So that's the basic idea. I can add more people, Albert Einstein, I think he was like 70, I don't know, I have no idea. So add friend, he appears here. If I want to update him, I can come here and say 23. Albert, now it's 23. It actually wasn't. What happened? We got an error. Why did we get an error? That's weird. Can set age of null. Can set age of null? Why can't we set age of null? Wait a second. Oh, this is an error, and I know why this has an error. Because when we add, and this is something good because some of you might have, if you worked more with the project, you might have encountered this. Basically, remember that if you want to update or delete something, it has to have a value called _ID, right? And obviously it has. Like when we refresh the page and we grab the data from the database, it automatically comes with the data from the database because we have a column called _ID. However, when we come here and we say that we want to set the list of friends equal to this new object, when we add something, we're only adding the name and the age. We're not actually adding an ID, right? And that is actually a huge problem for this. I don't actually know how we would do this because we don't predetermine the ID. Actually, we can do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here in and by the way, I finished the tutorial, the important parts. This is just me fixing one last problem. If you want to keep around to see it, I would recommend it because it's cool. So basically what I can send here is maybe I can send friend, right? Can I try to send friend? Let's see if that works. So I'm going to restart the server here and let's see if that works. So I'm going to open up my inspect element, and this is how I usually debug. I open up my network and I'm going to try to insert someone random. You can see that in the add friend, the response, yes, so the response was the user. So we actually got the user in the front end. That's great. You know why? Because since we got this response, we can now grab this response on the dot then by saying response, just like we did with the get. And now we can just come here and literally just pass a property called _ID, which is going to be equal to the response.data._ID. And now if I save this, I'm going to basically refresh this. I'm going to delete this random guy I just created. I'm going to add someone else. I'm going to add John Lennon 65. Let me add him. And let's update John Lennon. Let's make John Lennon have 34. Let's see if it works. It works perfectly because now we actually have an ID on the added elements. Now let's delete John. Let's delete Albert. And yeah, you can see clearly it's working. This is basically it. So I would really appreciate if you guys could leave a like. this is the end of this small series, but it's not actually the end because I'm still going to make some videos on deploying this. So a lot of people have been asking me how to deploy this. So I'm going to deploy the front end and the back end, the front end with Detlify and the back end on Heroku. Everyone can use this project when I deploy it. So I'm going to show you guys in the next video, and it's going to be really cool. You guys will be able to deploy your React application with the back end in Node. So yeah, that's cool. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down below what you want to see next. Also subscribe because I'm posting every single day. Like I literally have a midterm in 30 minutes and I should have been studying, but I thought why not I cram out a new video for tomorrow, and yeah, that's basically it. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.